After the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in U.S. history, Donald Trump pays his respects to the victims. But why are some Democrats blaming him for the synagogue shooting? I'm Imran Garta, and today's Newsmaker is anti-Semitism in the U.S. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's the least anti-Semitic person you've ever seen in your entire life. But after 11 Jewish worshippers were gunned down at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, not everyone believes him. Critics of the U.S. president, including senior figures in the Democratic Party, argue Trump bears some responsibility. Do they have a point? Well, Trump's time in office has been plagued with controversy. He called white supremacist marchers in Charlottesville fine people and hired Steve Bannon, the man who ran the far-right news website Breitbart. But anti-Semitism is nothing new to the U.S. It existed long before Trump became president. The question is, has he made it worse? And is he doing anything to tackle it? That debate in a moment. But first, Randolph Nogel reports.
It's a very horrific crime scene. It's one of the worst that I've seen, and I've been on some plane crashes. It's very bad.
A community left grieving for 11 people killed in what's believed to be a hate-inspired attack.
We will survive this, and we will be stronger, but we will never be the same.
The alleged gunman, Robert D. Bowers, targeted the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. The attack is being prosecuted as a hate crime.
During the course of his deadly assault on the people of the synagogue, Bowers made statements regarding genocide and his desire to kill Jewish people.
Bowers is also believed to have posted anti-Semitic comments online, including one aimed specifically at the synagogue's Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or HIAS, which helps to resettle refugees. Hours before the attack, he reportedly wrote, "HIAS likes to bring in invaders that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in." His message is believed to refer to Central American migrants trying to enter the U.S. from Mexico. U.S. President Donald Trump has described that as an invasion.
We have people coming into the country or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them. But we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals.
Many in Squirrel Hill, the community where the attack took place, and across the country, believe Trump's rhetoric is at least in part responsible for a rise in hate crime. Incidents targeting Jewish people rose 57% last year, the largest single-year increase on record.
I am the least anti-Semitic person that you've ever seen in your entire life. Number two, racism. The least racist person.
Trump has made a number of incendiary comments, but perhaps what triggered the most criticism was his response to clashes at a white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia.
I think there's blame on both sides. You had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest.
The shooter in Pittsburgh is somebody who was provoked, it seems, by the caravan that the president has spent so much time talking about. Why is he out there, when you say he's trying to unite the country, why is he out there
the very first thing that the president did was condemn the attacks both in Pittsburgh and in the pipe bombs. The very first thing the media did was blame the president and make him responsible for these ridiculous acts. That is outrageous that would be the very first reaction of so many people across this country.
Now, many in this community are asking what's next, and whether or not the president will tone down his rhetoric, which many see as part of the reason for rising hate crime in America. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Pittsburgh is Sasha King. She's the leader of progressive Jewish group Bend the Arc. They started the petition against Trump's visit to Pittsburgh until he denounced white nationalism. In Washington, D.C., we have law professor Frank Buckley. He's the author of the book, The Republican Workers' Party, How the Trump Victory Drove Everyone Crazy and why it was exactly what we needed. And completing our panel in London is Hen Mazir. He's an Israeli-born writer and commentator and former officer with the Israeli army. I thank you all for joining us. Sasha, let me begin with you. Tell me why you protested the president's visit and why you believe that he might have had something to do with the hate that led to the killing of those 11 people?
We protested Trump's visit to, or hosted a rally against President Trump's visit to Pittsburgh because the actions of this administration, the speech promoted within it, often we believe really led to the deaths of 11 people in my community. When President Trump was elected, we saw a growth in the amount of hate crimes and anti-Semitism within our own community. We also saw a growth in anti-Semitic tropes in the media, like the use of globalist and cosmopolitan and George Soros paying protesters in the community, which culminated in a white supremacist, white nationalist sympathizer listening to this speech that was promoted by our administration and in the media that there were Muslim terrorists that were going to infiltrate the caravan that was going to invade the United States. And this gunman came into our synagogue Tree of Life congregation because we had a Shabbat the week earlier that we were promoting love for refugees and immigrants and slaughtered 11 members of my community. There's a direct line between statements made and what happened here.
Okay, so Frank Buckley. Yeah, okay, let me go to Frank, Sasha. Sorry to interrupt you. So Frank, we have the president saying, you know, unknown Middle Easterners are coming to the border. He was hyping the migrant caravan. We have Robert Bowers listening to this. That conspiracy that behind all the Latino criminals, if you like, and unknown Middle Easterners and all these evil people, you have some sort of Jewish hand pushing them into America. That's the conspiracy going along the far right and the alt-right, especially on the net. The president was undoubtedly giving a nod and a wink to this. Shouldn't he be held responsible in some way for maybe adding fuel to the fire?
Well, actually, I think that's mostly nonsense. I think, firstly, that whilst it is the case, we generally, I think, should tone down the rhetoric. It is actually the liberals who really should worry more about doing that. You know, in the vileness that one sees or hears on television and in radio in America, it's not coming solely from one direction. It's more than anything, I think, coming from the left. But I agree the rhetoric should be turned down. But, you know, incidentally, the idea that the only American president who has a Jewish daughter and a Jewish grandchildren and who moved the embassy to Jerusalem has a smear anything like anti-Semitism in him, that's just sheer nonsense.
But Frank,
I mean, the idea that you can take an issue like immigration and say that this reflects on, you know, on how he feels about Jews is simply absurd.
Okay, but interesting. You mentioned moving the embassy to Jerusalem, right? I mean, you would accept that somebody could be an anti-Semite and still politically support the state of Israel. We see it in the United States with a lot of people who believe in the rapture. They support the state of Israel, if only for the fact that they believe it's set up so that the Jews would eventually be annihilated before Armageddon, right? So let's just park that off as a litmus test for not having any anti-Semitism. And let me ask you, Frank, what you think about when I met white nationalists and the KKK themselves. I made a documentary on this. They endorsed Trump, they supported Trump, and mixed into their hatred, they would say they hate blacks and they hate Mexicans and they hate Muslims and so forth. They always found that the Jews were behind everything. They found that the ultimate hatred was there for Jews. Trump knowingly, you would accept this, Frank, throughout his campaign and now through his presidency, has given wolf whistles to those types of people because he doesn't want to use them as his base. Would you accept that, Frank?
I don't accept that for a single second, Imran. I think that's absolutely nonsense. Look, I can tell you something about the campaign because I worked on it. The campaign had three main focus groups, three main outreach groups. They were evangelicals, African Americans, and Hispanics. I mean, there was nothing of white nationalism in what Trump was saying. Trump went out of his way to try to embrace all Americans. He was indeed a nationalist, but he was not a white nationalist. And that's merely a smear. And I think we have to be very careful about tossing around those kinds of charges when they really rest on nothing more than a conspiracy theory.
What's the conspiracy theory? I'm telling you directly, the KKK supported and endorsed Trump, and they felt that he was their man. I'm asking if you find any correlation between them.
No, I don't. I think it's just purely a smear. And I'll give you one example, as you've asked for it. I mean, the word globalist was mentioned. Okay, well, a big part of Trump's campaign was to insist that we hadn't paid enough attention to the fate of ordinary American workers, and we had concerned ourselves too much with, right, you know, how the world in general was doing through things like free trade, without thinking about what the effect was in America. So yes, he was an economic nationalist, and there's no question about that. But I didn't. You really are not going to be able to find racist things that he has said, except maybe by way of joking.
And Hen, I'm going to bring you in a minute, but I just want to finish this point with Frank. Frank, would you accept that, generally speaking, those who tend to use the following terms within their argument: globalist, George Soros, Hollywood elites, media elites, tend to be the types who are using it as a wolf whistle for anti-Semitism, especially in Europe, especially with the far right in Europe right now?
Yeah, I can't speak to the far right in Europe, and indeed, I guess there is a problem with anti-Semitism in some parts of Europe at the moment. But you know, we went through this sort of thing in the 1950s with McCarthyism, and this is really what we're talking about right now. You pick on one word and you say, this is a magic word, and if you use that word, it has all these connotations. And moreover, there are some crazies out there in America who indeed are anti-Semitic and use that word, okay? But you know what you've proven? All you've proven is that there are crazies in America. You know what? We know this.
Okay, so Hen Mazik, there are crazies in America. It is not being pushed or endorsed by the president, and the atmosphere is not being created by the president, according to Frank Buckley. Do you agree with him?
I mean, President Trump was interviewed on Fox News after a terror attack and said, in comment to the statement that he made about being a nationalist, that he said, I love my country, I'm not a globalist. So if we're talking about toning down the rhetoric, maybe it's not the time to use this word when the shooter himself on his social media account said that he hates globalists. He said that he called Jews globalists. So I don't think that the president is anti-Semitic, but I think that the rhetoric sure plays to the hand of those people, and I do agree with Frank, because in some part the idea that it's only anti-Semitism from the right that we need to discuss is not right, and it's not a way to tackle anti-Semitism.
No,
we need to also acknowledge that the far left.
And Hen, I'm not asking that, right? Hen, I'm talking about the most powerful man in America and arguably the most powerful man in the world, right? Undoubtedly, if you want to give me examples from Louis Farrakhan, absolutely. Farrakhan says some crazy stuff about Jews, absolutely, right? And there are numerous other examples on the left and amongst lots of other people. But specifically related to this, the charge right now, or the claim right now, Hen, especially from Democrats and many others, liberals, if you like, is that the president has created an atmosphere for this sort of stuff that we thought we had dealt with in the past to re-emerge. Is that true, Hen?
That's the problem. I mean, the premise of saying that we're dealing with a new problem that never been here, it's been here. It's been on the far left and on the far right. Definitely, I agree that the rhetoric is playing to their hands. I don't think that the president is anti-Semitic, but I think that the thing he says are fueling this fire. And but I just doubt that it will be the right way to tackle it, to say it's a problem on the right. If we're not going to say anti-Semitism is wrong, whether it comes from Linda Sarsour or Louis Farrakhan that calls Jews termites, and being supported by those, by the Women March.
But again, Hen, Farrakhan's not the president of the United States. Linda Sarsour is not the president of the United States, right? This is the most powerful person. Right. This is why we're asking, does it go to the very top? Has he opened up something on the far right, which is his base, not the far left, not Linda Sarsour? Has he opened something up on the far right, yes or no?
So I'm saying the answer is yes. I do think that the rhetoric is playing for it, but I'm just saying that it's not the right way to tackle it, to say that it's a problem on the right, that we're just seeing it now, and because of the president there was a shooting. I don't think that this is the situation. I will be the last one to tell American Jews what to say to the president, and if the lady that was speaking first, her criticism for her president is legitimate, because she's been through tragedy and she knows what's happening there. But so with that being said, I think that it's not right to use it as a political.
Okay, but hold on, Frank, for a second. Just for a second, Frank, and Hen, I'm interested in this now because Hen said he'd be the last person to tell you what to think about this, right? Sasha, let me build on that for a second and ask you how you felt about Naftali Bennett, the Israeli politician, coming through and making the comparison that Israel's battles with terrorism in a specific context in the Middle East are the same as the battle you guys faced when a man came in and gunned down 11 worshippers. How did you feel about that? Did you accept that? What was going on?
I think he has the absolute right to make that statement, but I have a slight issue with saying that, especially as a social scientist, that prejudice experienced when one group is the dominant majority within a community is the same as prejudice experienced when you're a minority and surrounded by populations, and depending on the goodwill of those populations are the same. That does not add up. We're struggle, and this is where there's a lot of kind of it's somewhat of dismissal of what happens to us in the diaspora. But how we experience prejudice is we have to expect, hope on the goodwill of those around us who are not like us. And so when we have people making decisions and making statements about us negatively, and then encouraging people on the fringes that are aligned with various different groups, left or right, about us, it does often culminate in a huge systemic issue of violence. This was not the only violent incident that happened in America this week. There was also the attempt on a Kroger to murder 2 African Americans and to go after a church. This is a pattern. It wasn't just us attacked. We have a huge problem with people in power, administrations, making statements that endorse prejudicial behavior and it manifesting in attacks on those of us who are most vulnerable.
Okay, so Frank, is Sasha seeing patterns where they don't exist?
Yeah, let's get real here. Let me go back to the word globalist. Can I tell you what it was really about in 2016? It was about none of what we talked about. Rather, the issue was, should America embark on foreign wars with the idea of nation building? Trump explicitly ran against George W. Bush's wars. That's one thing that globalism meant. Another thing that globalism meant was free trade agreements that may benefit other countries, but not this country. Globalism also meant open borders with respect to immigration. Those are all legitimate political issues, and Trump won on them. And I think the opposition comes from people who take the other side on all those issues, who like, for example, the idea of open borders and the like. Well,
but Frank,
let me tell you, if you're a nationalist, you don't like all of that stuff.
Is it of any consequence?
Don't try to delegitimize real political points here.
Okay, is it of any consequence that among those who are anti-globalist, they truly believe that it's the Jews that are pushing America into all these wars, the Jews who want America to be in a global monetary system, and so on and so forth? This is meat and drink for a lot of the base. Is it of any consequence that, maybe, let me put it to you this way. Let me put it to you this way, Frank. With a galvanized right-wing nationalism, is it a symptom of that you're going to see anti-Semitism on the rise?
Let us say that there is a political policy which is benign and which helps people and objectively is really good for America, but that it's taken by some crazies to represent something other than what it was meant. The question is the person who puts forward those really benign views to be charged with the fault of the crazies? And the answer is no, particularly when here you're talking about a president who, in its objective ways, is the last person you'd accuse of being anti-Semitic.
Okay, Sasha?
My chief issue when you get into policies and how the administration has handled them in terms of dealing with populations is the rescinding of FBI funding for monitoring hate groups. And, we trying to see that nice little relationship with what happened in my community. Those policies have impacts too.
Hen Mazik, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, says the number of anti-Semitic incidents has risen sharply in the last 2 years. If you had to attribute it to any one thing, and if it's not the president, what would that be, Hen?
I think that the problem is, again, both on the left and the radical right. When we're talking about Jews, the idea that the radical right, the alt-right, is saying that the Jews will not replace us, they won't replace the white race. And then you have on the radical left people that are saying Jews are the white race and they are the one that control America and they are the one that control, Israel is the strongest country in the Middle East that is responsible for everything that is wrong in this world. So I think the Jews are in the middle of this fight, that on the radical left they are being told that they are white. The radical right, they're being told that they will never replace the white race. And then that's what we're seeing today, the rhetoric that is about Israel, about power, about the fact that half of the word Jewry that is in Israel is responsible for everything that is bad. I think that the problem is on both sides. And if we, the way to tackle it again is to call anti-Semitism what it is, and to say Louis Farrakhan calls Jews termites is anti-Semitic, using rhetoric that a shooter used the day after. He's also not helping the Jewish community, and the way to fight those things is to condemn it and to stand strong. And I think that the Jewish community now needs to come together and to drop all this, the political ideas. It's not about politics, it's about the safety of this community, and I can't believe that in 2018 we even need to raise this issue of the safety of Jews and what is anti-Semitic.
Let's bring Frank in, and I'll give you the final word, Sasha. So Frank, come in.
To your listeners in Turkey, let me say that it is not the case that anyone who is Jewish in America need fear walking down any street in America. This is not, as it is, I think, in some parts of France or Norway, a case where you have no-go zones where Jewish people might feel threatened. In fact, the Simon Wiesenthal Center says, you know, what you really have to worry about if you're Jewish here basically are American universities, where the boycott and divestment movement has morphed from being anti-Israeli to being somewhat anti-Jewish.
Yeah, okay, but Frank, nobody from BDS went into a synagogue and gunned down 11 people, right?
Yes.
Absolutely right. That's the act of a person who deserves to be put away forever.
Okay, Sasha.
At a minimum.
Sasha, let me give you the final word because we're running out of time. Go ahead, Sasha.
One thing I want our Turkish listeners to understand, that we do have a problem with an increased amount of hate speech coming from politicians within the administration and outside of it. There's a reason why Steve King was censored for his association with white nationalists, and that his speech and the impact that it has made, that we have an administration that has cut funding for monitoring of hate groups in this country. And the reason why that's important is my state, Pennsylvania, has one of the highest concentrations of hate groups in the North. This made us vulnerable, and this has culminated in deaths in my community. So if an administration cares about its minority populations, the Jewish community, refugee communities, and all minorities in general, it needs to look at those policies.
Okay, Sasha, Frank, and Hen, I really appreciate you all taking the time to talk to us on the Newsmakers. Thanks for joining us. Still to come, Colombo in crisis. Sri Lanka's president sacks the prime minister and replaces him with a former strongman. Could the country descend into violence once again? And after 40 years in prison, a member of the Black liberation group MOVE is released and reunited with his family. We speak with his son. Mahinda Rajapaksa is the man many blame for atrocities during Sri Lanka's brutal civil war. When he was defeated in presidential elections in 2015 by Maithripala Sirisena, there was renewed hope for the country. But in a shock move, Rajapaksa is back, this time as prime minister. The man who had been serving as prime minister was sacked, but has called the decision unconstitutional and rejected it. Now the government appears to be in crisis, and many fear Sri Lanka could slide back into another violent era. For more, here's Haider Abbasi.
Pomp and ceremony for Sri Lanka's new prime minister. It's been a smooth succession for Mahinda Rajapaksa. At least it seems to be. But these crowds tell a different story. They're out to support Ranil Wickremesinghe. He served as Prime Minister for 3 years, until Friday, when he was sacked by the President.
There was a motion of no confidence against me in Parliament. It was defeated. A majority voted against it, showing that they had confidence in me. That situation has not changed. Since I have a majority, I remain as the Prime Minister and I will function as the Prime Minister.
Both men now say they're in charge of Sri Lanka's government. Wickremesinghe's removal by President Maithripala Sirisena has shocked the nation. But Sirisena insists the dismissal was legal.
All political parties, government officials, religious leaders and the people as a whole should unite behind the new government of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Sirisena and Wickremesinghe had been ruling in a coalition since winning elections in 2015, but the alliance slowly crumbled. Sirisena says he's had major differences with Wickremesinghe over policies, but the man he's chosen to replace him is both popular and controversial. Mahinda Rajapaksa twice served as Sri Lanka's president, in 2005 and then again in 2010. While in office, he removed checks on the presidency and the two-term limit. He also signed construction deals with China, which has left Sri Lanka in billions of dollars of debt. But Rajapaksa is also known for ending the civil war. After nearly 30 years of fighting, the military defeated the separatist Tamil Tigers in 2009. But his government has been accused of killing thousands of civilians as part of that campaign. When Sirisena defeated Rajapaksa in presidential elections 3 years ago, he promised to investigate allegations of war crimes. He also reduced the powers of the presidency. Many in the Tamil community are dismayed at Rajapaksa's return to government. Sirisena says Parliament will reconvene on Monday. Members will have the chance to choose between Rajapaksa and Wickremesinghe in a confidence vote. But Rajapaksa has already chosen his cabinet, and the Speaker of Parliament has been instructed by Sirisena to recognise him as Prime Minister. Could this move backfire on President Sirisena, and how will Rajapaksa's return be received across Sri Lanka? Haida Abasi, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined now from Colombo by Dilante Wittanage. He's a former government advisor and the chief executive of Buddhist nationalist group Bodu Balasena. In London, we have Alan Keenan. He's a senior Sri Lanka analyst at the International Crisis Group. And completing our panel in New York is Mario Arultas, an advocacy director at the People for Equality and Relief in Sri Lanka. I thank you all for joining us. Dilante, let me start with you. So many people see your country in crisis right now. The president sacking the prime minister, replacing him, bringing in Mr. Rajapaksa. Dilante, do you believe that it was the right decision?
It is very difficult for us to decide on this decision because some says that, president has the constitutional power to do that, but some others argue that it is not correct. But what I want to say is that people, if you look at this country, fed up about the politics played by Ranil Wickremesinghe during last 3.5 years. And after the war, we had reasonable stability in the government, stability in the country. But unfortunately, after 2015, when the new government came into power, people thought that they will introduce good governance practices. But unfortunately, during that period, we experienced two different leaders belonging to different social groups, political, cultural perspectives, had fight among them, and we felt that country is not moving forward. But at the same time, we don't know whether it's true or not. There was a complaint by somebody, and president claimed that there was assassination, attempt to assassinate him by some ministers and some groups within the government. And as a result of that, he decided to change the premiership. And there are issues.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the claim, right? And that's the claim. And a lot of people are surprised, not only by how swiftly things happened, but who he brought in place as Prime Minister, Mr. Rajapaksa. Let me ask you, Alan Keenan, as the International Crisis Group, I've read some of your stuff in relation to this and in response to this. You guys are not happy. Tell me why.
Well, I'd say we're not happy on, and I think we join a lot of others who are not happy on two counts. First of all, there's the procedural one, which is how Sirisena, how Ranil Wickremesinghe was pushed out and Mahinda Rajapaksa brought in. Virtually all independent legal analysts say that simply was not in the Constitution. Sirisena did not have these powers. So Mahinda Rajapaksa is there with a whole bunch of other new ministers in an illegal status. I mean, he doesn't have a legitimate claim to that role. Now, that's bad in of itself, but it's also sets a really bad precedent for any country for the Constitution to be willfully ignored and for power to be transferred by non-constitutional means. So that's the first point. Then I think independent of that, there's lots of reasons to be worried about the style of governance that Mahinda Rajapaksa has employed in the past and the likelihood that that will be repeated. And I'm thinking in particular about not only the gross violations of human rights leading to the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians at the end of the war, but many other things, disappearances, enforced disappearances of political dissidents and activists, attacks, murders, and beatings of journalists, basically shutting down most of democratic space in Sri Lanka. So that's why so many people are worried about Mahinda Rajapaksa coming in. Whether he came in legitimately or illegitimately, that would be an issue as well.
Okay, so Mario, what's your bigger gripe? How this happened, or who the man is that's taking the role of Prime Minister, and what it means especially for Tamils?
I think both. I think we need to also look at the bigger picture here, where the Sri Lanka structure is renowned for being flawed as such, and previous governments have not had, the constitution has not had bearings on previous government when it came to killing its own civilians. So yes, while this is unprecedented in the sort of power grab that happened, to Tamils this was something that was somewhat predicted over the last few years. And yeah, the concern for safety of Tamils, but also Muslims must be noted at this point. And I would like to point out that the other panelist, Mr. Vidyanayaka, he's the leader of a group, the Bodu Bala Sena, which is an extremist group which has engaged in hate speech and has incited violence, which actually cost the lives of Muslims earlier this year. And over the past few years, this has happened repeatedly, even under the Ranil government. So I think it's important to note that, while it's important to note that the repression under Mahinda Rajapaksa after 2009 and before 2015 was extreme, and the election of the Ranil government opened up some space for civil activism. What happened in the meantime is that the military and the intelligence services were actually monitoring Tamils and taking detailed records of what was happening.
Right.
So I think the fear from Tamils is that the actual structural problem was never really solved.
Right. Okay. So I don't want to get too sidetracked, and we've had this discussion before, Delante, but I want to give you the opportunity to respond, because when there was trouble on the ground, we addressed a lot of issues with regards to your organization and your views about Muslims in Sri Lanka and whether you consider them equal citizens and so forth. But we have a claim from Mario. He says your organization is an extremist organization, and you guys have been milking bad rhetoric all this time, all along anyway, and you are responsible for deaths and you have blood on your hands. You can address that. Delante, go ahead.
So very unfortunate how the Mario claimed this, because our hands are very clean and we never had any violence. Actually, if you look at what happened in the Kandy recently, and you can see that none of the Bodu Bala Sena members arrested or nothing happened. Even in Aludgama incidents, we have requested former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, present President Maithripala Sirisena, as well as Prime Minister, to appoint a commission and to investigate, because we were not involved. And recently, some claims that there was some of the police officers and some political leaders were behind having a conspiracy in order to have this trouble in Kandy area. So, and if you know, we are negotiating with Muslims and Tamils, we are working with Muslims and Tamils in this country. So only media created this hype, and people aware of this really in Sri Lanka, that we were not involved in those activities. So our hands are not without blood, and we are very clear about that. Actually, what I want to say that our friend from London was saying that many people are not happy about what happened in Sri Lanka. I believe that people who supported internationally from London and US and other countries to change the regime, Rajapaksa regime, they might not be very happy about it. But if you look at the present situation, most of the Sri Lankan people, I believe, even Muslims and Tamils, are happy about this change.
Well, we don't know
there
that.
Are issues.
There hasn't been an election. There hasn't been a poll. We have no idea of finding that out.
No, why not?
At
now,
least
recently
at this moment. Have you done a poll?
Local government authorities, and majority of votes won by Maithripala Sirisena party and Mahinda Rajapaksa party. So therefore, we cannot say that people are not supporting them.
It was not done after the sacking of the Prime Minister, the sacking of the cabinet, suspending Parliament. Okay, hold on for a second. Now, I just want to make sure that we don't sort of mix a whole bunch of issues here. I just want to give Mario, I want to give you one chance to respond to some of what Delante said, and then I want to put a button on that so I can look at some of the international implications here and what the United States, China, and others have said. So, direct response, Mario, before we move on. Go ahead, Mario.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's much disputed that the BBS is a hate group. They formed a partnership with Burma's 969 movement, as in this is not something that's under dispute. The leader of the BBS is actually in prison for targeting the wife of a disappeared person. So I think this is something that of course this is the answer that will come from the BBS.
Okay, Alan Keenan, let me talk about the big picture again. The Chinese were very quick to congratulate Rajapaksa. Tell me what's going on there.
Well, the Chinese then, to be fair, soon thereafter met with Ranil Wickremesinghe too. So I think they're trying to present themselves as balanced. The way I think about it is, under Mahinda Rajapaksa's presidency, the Sri Lankan government enthusiastically embraced Chinese money. Chinese gave crucial political support and sold lots of weapons during the last stages of the war. And then after the war, offered a lot of loans and other sort of infrastructural development to build lots of big projects, which Mahinda Rajapaksa got a lot of credit for, also a lot of criticism for. So then when Ranil Wickremesinghe tied up with Maithripala Sirisena to challenge in the presidential election of January 2015, part of their platform was to end some of the ongoing Chinese-funded and implemented projects because they were seen as wasteful and expensive and so forth. So I think, but what happened was the Sirisena-Wickremesinghe government then found that they didn't have enough money to pay Chinese debts and other debts, and they didn't have the money to do all these other things they wanted to do. So they ended up going back to the Chinese, but they did it reluctantly. So I think, it's the difference of under Rajapaksa in the past and likely in the future, it will be an enthusiastic embrace of China, whereas under Ranil, it was a reluctant one. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah, massive infrastructure deals with China, especially with Hambantota port. Billions of dollars rather in debt are the Sri Lankan government to the Chinese. Yeah. Mario, let me talk a little bit about reconciliation here and the issue of the civil war and the legacy of the civil war. Yeah. There are those, many Tamils accuse Rajapaksa of being a war criminal. Many others see him as a hero for ending the war, for defeating the Tamil Tigers and stopping the war by winning it, right? Isn't it an argument to say, well, I mean, he was leader during wartime, and it's going to be very different now because this is a Sri Lanka under peace. So you can't judge him on his actions during wartime now. Things are different. The context is completely different.
I mean, I think there's no argument to justify the massacres of tens of thousands of Tamil civilians during the war even. But even if you look beyond that, if you look after May 18, 2009, until 2015 when he was deposed, his reign was marked by abductions, by killings, and not only himself, not only the state, but also paramilitaries aligned to the state. And if you look at the sort of crimes that happened during the war, for example, the leader of the LTT, his 12-year-old son was executed. It was, we found pretty conclusive proof that it was the military that had him in the last custody, and then they found his body riddled with bullets. So as such, it's all linked. This is something that singular Buddhist nationalism underpins the reign of Mahinda Rajapaksa's government, and it never really went away under the Ranil Sirisena alliance. So although it took more of a back step. And I think this is important to note, that the population is one that does vote for nationalist rhetoric and populist rhetoric. And Mahinda Rajapaksa knew that this was the case, and it seems like he's taken advantage of that.
Right. So, Delante, the argument being made by Mario is that we're seeing this swing towards Sinhala Buddhist nationalism at the expense of the rights of Tamils, of Muslims, and others, no matter what. Is this true?
I don't think there is no such thing called Sinhala Buddhist extremists. Actually, Sinhalese, if you look at Colombo city, most of the population, if you look at Tamils and Muslims, they live in Colombo city. Actually, if you go to Jaffna and the Muslim areas where they don't even allow Sinhalese people to live, you can go through the statistics and details. Actually, if you look at Bodhubala Sena, we believe that whether you are Sinhalese or Buddhist or Tamils or Muslims, we all have the equal rights. So therefore, you cannot say that we are extremist people. But unfortunately, we were fighting against extremism. We were fighting against terrorism. We were against LTT because they took arms. We had the same thing for Sinhalese youth JVP. When they took arms also, we were against that. When Muslims trying to take arms also, we are against that. So it's nothing to do with Sinhalese, Buddhist or Tamils. And actually what I want to say that I'm completely disagree with Mario, because BBS leader imprisoned not because of the reason you mentioned. It is for the contempt of court. Actually we understand it's a wrong decision. Actually, for something he not done, he was imprisoned for 19 years. And actually, we think that that's a crime of a judicial system of the Sri Lankan government, manipulated by the police and the Aegis department.
Okay.
And if you look at... Sure.
Okay. So, Delante, I mean, and one of the reasons we have you on is because what you're saying is, in many ways, as far as we understand, representative of what a lot of people do believe and why a lot of people do support Mr. Rajapaksa and others. Alan, as we circle back to the beginning here, you mentioned two issues. The one issue being the concern over it not being constitutional, what had taken place, the dissolving of parliament and so forth. And the second issue being the man who's now been thrust on stage as the prime minister. What needs to be done in order to ensure that things don't take a sour turn and things don't get ugly?
Well, there's no guarantee of, that can be prevented, but I think the most likely scenario is that when the Rajapaksa and Sirisena think that Rajapaksa, has enough votes in the parliament, that he's won over enough MPs from Ranil's side through various means, which I'll leave unnamed now, it's that at that point, parliament will be reconvened. And then there will be a vote, Mahinda will be approved, and everything from their perspective will be fine. They will say he's legitimate, he's gone through the proper procedures, he's prime minister, everything's done. The question is what can be done to prevent that scenario from playing out? Because of course, even if that happens, I don't think his prime ministership will in fact be credible or legitimate, because it will have relied on this unconstitutional initial step. So the question is what kind of pressure from outside, what kind of pressure from inside through protest, peaceful protest, and can be brought to bear that might shift those dynamics and crucially might persuade those MPs who are now being offered money apparently and various other perks to actually stick with where they've been before. That's it's very difficult. The leverage that both domestic and international critics of Rajapaksa's appointment and sort of defenders of the rule of law and constitutional norms, the leverage they have is very limited, and it's but I think the challenge then also will be, if this scenario does play out, what then? Right. What will those Western governments who have been critical of this move do if Mahinda's sort of ensconced more firmly in power with the parliament's backing? Yeah.
Testing times for Sri Lanka. There's undoubtedly a political crisis. The Speaker of Parliament, who is on the opposite end of this to the President, saying there could be a bloodbath. That's from Karu Jayasuriya. We hope it doesn't come to that, and we will keep a close eye on the situation in Sri Lanka. For the moment, I have to move on. So, Delante Wittanage, Alan Keenan and Mario Arultas, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. 40 years ago, police in Philadelphia converged on the headquarters of the radical black liberation group MOVE in a bid to evict them from their communal home. What followed was one of the most dramatic shootouts of the black liberation struggle. As gunfire was exchanged, police officer James Ramp was killed. 2 years later, 9 members of the group were collectively convicted for his murder. 4 decades on, most remain behind bars, but one family has finally been reunited. After his wife was released just a few months ago, Mike Africa Sr. is now also free. Well, their son, Mike Africa Jr., was actually born behind bars and has spent his life fighting for his parents' release. And he joins us now from Philadelphia. Good to have you on the program, Mike. It must be a time of relief for you, jubilation. You were reunited with your mom a few months ago, reunited with your dad just a few weeks ago. Tell me how you feel.
It is a big relief. After so long, so many years of fighting for my parents to be released, it is a big relief. But we do have to keep in mind that there are still other people and families that have not been reunited. So we're still working, as we are feeling this joyous moment, this victory, we are still keeping in mind that the other people needs to be released as well.
Do you believe that it's inevitable that they will be released soon?
No, I don't believe it's inevitable. No, I don't, because two of the MOVE 9 members have already passed away in prison. So no, I don't believe it's inevitable. I think it's without pressure applied to the system that's keeping them in prison. I think that without that pressure, the system will try to keep them in prison for the rest of their lives.
Help us understand what your mom and dad think about the world that they've been released back into. Things are really different compared to 40 years ago, right? Your organization is based on the best definitions of black liberation, anarcho-primitivist organization. Things were really different in the 70s. Tell me what they think about life in America in 2018 and whether they think their struggle still needs to continue.
Well, things are different. The things that they have the most difficulty grasping is the radical differences between the health of people and the health of things. The water is different. And 40 years ago, in 1978, you didn't have to buy water. Water was it was clean enough where it came out of the tap on your sink and you could just drink it with from the sink. That's not the case anymore. You have to buy water. So that's a big difference. The technology is different. The cell phones, and then just the way people do things. The speed of life is different. So, we talk about it in the house and describe it as being like a time capsule that they were in, because a lot of things that we use, that we see every day, that we've kind of grew into the way the world is, they had no knowledge of it. And for them, it's like Home Depot didn't exist. Walmart didn't exist, so just things that we deal with every day or are around every day that we know of every day, they can't really understand it. But we're adjusting, and they are living their lives as best they can, trying to adjust and make sure that they maintain the teaching of John Africa so that they can work to help get the rest of the people out of prison.
Yeah, so back in the 70s and in the 80s, I mean, your movement was involved in shootouts with the cops. Law enforcement came at you guys really hard. I mean, they even dropped a bomb in 1985 on the headquarters of the group, if you like. Now, in the year 2018, is the movement, MOVE, still relevant? Is there a reason for you guys to exist and to try to make a change? And if so, what?
Well, yeah, the organization's core belief is life. And we believe that life needs to be free from sickness, from disease. We believe that life needs to be free from prisons. And all those things are worse now than they were before. MOVE, John Africa's teaching, has never been more important, because the things that John Africa talked about, freedom, freedom for life, period, is a thing that we deal with now. I mean, when you talk about mass incarceration, when you talk about the animals that are enslaved, that are put in zoos and prisons, when you talk about the water that is polluted, when you talk about people that are more degenerating, their health is degenerating at a much more rapid rate. Obesity is a problem, alcoholism, drug addiction, all these things that are here now are the things that John Africa was talking about working to solve. And those things are worse now than they were before. So the need for change for the better is even more so than it was in 1978.
Do you have more or less trust for law enforcement, the same law enforcement that released your parents in the past few months?
I don't have any trust or mistrust for anyone until they show me the example as to which they follow. You know, if you show me an example of trust, then I'll treat you and deal with you based on that. If you show me an example of mistrust, then that's the way that I'll deal with it. I mean, there are some police officers who are supportive of MOVE, and there are some that are not. And I don't look at police as all bad and just blanketly say all police are bad and they should be, you know, no, it's not like that with MOVE. If you do what's right, if you're willing to, you know, be okay with us, then we're willing to be okay with you. This is not, it's not like racism where, you know, one race of people hate another race of people and it doesn't matter who they are or what they do or what they're about. MOVE, we do things on an individual basis. If a cop is kind and generous and okay and law-abiding himself, then we're cool with them. But the ones that are not, no, we don't trust them at all.
Mike Africa, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.